They called it the King of Battle. But in the chaos of World War II, it wasn't kings or generals who decided the fate of armies. It was artillery. The thunder that rolled across continents, the invisible power that shattered steel and spirit alike. And no army wielded that thunder more effectively than the Americans. By 1944, as Allied troops pushed toward Nazi Germany, the battlefield had become a duel between two doctrines: German precision and American power. Both sides had skill, both had courage, but only one had the resources to turn war into an industrial science. For German soldiers, the American artillery wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature, something they could not see, could not escape, could not fight, a terror that came from the sky and erased everything in its path. The story begins in the aftermath of Normandy, after the beaches had been taken. After the hedgerows were soaked in blood, American units began pushing inland towards St. Lo, a small town that would become a graveyard for German artillery. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, an artillery officer in the German 352nd Infantry Division, wrote in his diary, "We no longer fight soldiers. We fight their guns. They see everything. They strike everywhere. Our men die before they even see the enemy." The American system was unlike anything the Germans had faced before. While the Wehrmacht relied on experienced officers to calculate firing solutions by hand, the Americans relied on an industrial method, a system so refined that even an average gun crew could deliver devastatingly accurate fire within minutes. Every American battery was connected by radio, their fire controlled by a network of forward observers, surveyors, and mathematicians. These were not random shots. Each round was plotted, predicted, and synchronized with terrifying precision. The system they called time on target allowed dozens of guns to fire from different positions so that every shell arrived on the same second. To the soldiers caught beneath it, it felt as though the earth itself had exploded. When American forces broke through St. Lo in July 1944, the scale of artillery fire defied imagination. Over 250,000 shells were fired in just a few days. German positions simply vanished. Fields, forests, entire villages disappeared under a rain of steel. Survivors described men buried alive, tanks flipped over by the shock waves, and horses vaporized where they stood. For men like Bauer, the psychological toll was as destructive as the shells themselves. "When the firing starts," he wrote, "we no longer think of fighting. We only think of surviving." The contrast in philosophy was stark. German doctrine emphasized economy, deliberate, concentrated fire, carefully planned, meticulously observed. The Americans, on the other hand, believed in overwhelming volume and immediate response. A single infantry platoon could call for fire support and receive it within minutes. The result was battlefield dominance unlike anything Europe had seen. In one engagement, a German counterattack near Mortain was obliterated before it began. Within 3 minutes of contact, over 30 American batteries, more than 350 guns, opened fire in perfect coordination. When the smoke cleared, the German tanks were burning wrecks, their infantry scattered or dead. Major Otto Schmidt, who commanded a German regiment during that battle, later wrote, "We believed ourselves masters of tactics, but they fought with an orchestra of guns. Their coordination was mechanical, their speed inhuman. Behind that speed was a logistics miracle. Every American shell, every fuse, every gun barrel was the product of an industrial machine operating at a scale the Germans couldn't comprehend. American factories were producing artillery shells faster than the Wehrmacht could fire them. Every week, hundreds of thousands rolled off the production lines. packed into wooden crates, shipped across oceans, and delivered directly to the front lines by fleets of trucks that never stopped moving. In contrast, German artillery often relied on horse-drawn transport. Entire batteries became stranded when horses were killed or roads destroyed. Ammunition shortages were constant. Commanders were forced to ration shells so tightly that firing even a few rounds required authorization from higher command. Sergeant Kurt Zimmermann recalled the frustration of this imbalance. Our orders were clear: 50 shells per gun, no more. Meanwhile, the Americans fired thousands each day. We fought a poor man's war against a rich man's enemy. The disparity didn't just affect morale, it dictated tactics. American infantry could attack with confidence, knowing that their artillery was always within reach. German units, on the other hand, had to move, fight, and retreat under constant threat of annihilation from guns they couldn't reach or silence. As the front pushed eastward, the psychological weight on German soldiers grew unbearable. Reports described entire companies paralyzed by fear of artillery. Men refused to dig in shallow trenches because they believed the shells would find them no matter where they hid. Commanders tried to inspire courage, but nothing could stand against the thunder that came from nowhere. Even German generals began to acknowledge the impossible odds. They recognized that for every shell they fired, the Americans answered with 100. For every gun destroyed, 2 more appeared. The battlefield had become a contest of endurance, and Germany's endurance was breaking. During the autumn of 1944, as Allied forces approached the Siegfried Line, the German Artillery Corps was already exhausted. Supply trains were bombed, fuel was gone, horses starved, and morale collapsed. Yet even then, the Americans kept firing. In September, near Aachen, an entire German division was reduced to fragments under an artillery storm that lasted 36 hours. Survivors described the earth convulsing, trees uprooted, bunkers shattered, bodies torn apart by airbursts from the newly introduced proximity fuse, a weapon so advanced that it detonated automatically when near its target. The Germans could not understand how the Americans achieved such accuracy. They didn't know about the fuse, or the radar, or the mathematical tables that turned every gun into a precision instrument. All they knew was that their world was being dismantled, shell by shell. And yet, even as defeat loomed, German artillery officers continued to fight. They were professionals, disciplined, skilled, and brave. But they were trapped in a system that could not sustain them. Their training and courage could not compensate for the industrial might of the United States. Oberleutnant Hans Mueller, serving in the Ardennes, summarized the truth in his diary. "We do not lose because we lack bravery. We lose because they have made war a science." By the winter of 1944, that science would reach its terrifying peak, in a battle that would come to define the final collapse of German power. The Battle of the Bulge, December 16, 1944. The Ardennes, a frozen forest cloaked in fog. German tanks rumble through the darkness, engines muffled by snow, their crews praying the clouds will hold. It was Hitler's last gamble, the final great offensive in the West. Over 200,000 German troops and 1,000 tanks were thrown into the line, hoping to break through and split the Allied armies. The Germans counted on surprise, on weather, on luck. What they didn't count on was American artillery. For the first days, the plan worked. The fog grounded Allied aircraft. American units were scattered and disorganized. Villages fell, roads were overrun, and panic swept through the front. But the Americans had one weapon that didn't need clear skies: the guns. When the first German armored columns pushed toward St. Vith, American forward observers began calling in fire. Within minutes, the forest erupted. Shells screamed through the mist, exploding with thunderous precision. Entire tank columns vanished in bursts of flame and smoke. German officer Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann recorded what followed. "We had 50 shells per gun. That was our entire supply. We fired in support of the infantry. 10 minutes later, American counter-battery fire destroyed half our guns and killed most of the horses. We tried to move the rest, but without horses, we could only abandon them." It was the same story across the front. German guns fell silent. American guns never did. Even when their own supply briefly ran low, as at Bastogne, where artillery units were rationed to just 10 shells per day, they used every round to devastating effect. When the skies cleared after Christmas, resupply roared in. Then came the storm. During the 6 weeks of the Battle of the Bulge, over 1.2 million American artillery rounds were fired, an industrial avalanche of steel that crushed the last German hope of victory. Those who survived spoke of it as an apocalypse. Trees shattered into splinters. Men vanished in the airburst clouds of the new VT proximity fuse shells. The ground shook for hours at a time. There was nowhere to hide, no way to fight back. Oberleutnant Friedrich Mueller, who had seen his previous regiment destroyed in Normandy, was captured during the Bulge. His report, written from a POW camp, was simple and chilling. "We were defeated by American artillery before we were defeated by their infantry or armor. Every movement we made was observed. Every concentration of forces was destroyed. We could not move, could not defend, could not survive. The artillery ended us before the battle truly began." The German plan to reach Antwerp collapsed within a week. Armies that had begun the offensive at full strength ended it at less than half. 30 to 40% of their men lost, the majority to artillery fire. And while German survivors limped into captivity, the truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't luck. It wasn't just courage. It was system, method, precision born of industry and organization on a scale Germany could never match. In prisoner-of-war camps across America, captured German officers were astonished by what they saw. Trains hauling hundreds of artillery pieces, endless lines of trucks carrying shells, factories operating around the clock. The United States had made war mechanical, a machine that could not be stopped. One German prisoner, Obergefreiter Otto Schmidt, wrote home, "The Americans did not defeat us with tactics or courage, though they had both. They defeated us with industry. They could fire 100 shells for every one of ours. They could lose a tank and replace it in a week. We could not replace a single horse." In captivity, German artillery officers were sometimes allowed to attend American training demonstrations. There they discovered the secret of their defeat. The Americans had turned artillery from an art into an exact science. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, captured in Italy, wrote after attending such a lecture, "They have systematized everything we did by intuition. They rely not on brilliance, but on process. Any officer can perform their calculations. Any soldier can operate their radios. They have made artillery an industrial product, efficient, repeatable, deadly." It was this industrialization of warfare that Germany could not overcome. Every American gun was standardized, every shell interchangeable, every fuse compatible. That meant no delays, no shortages, no wasted effort. Meanwhile, Germany's production was fragmented. Dozens of fuse types, multiple calibers, competing factories, inefficiency everywhere. Even when Germany produced enough metal, It couldn't deliver the right pieces to the right front. The result was catastrophic. Commanders faced impossible choices: concentrate their men and be annihilated by artillery, or disperse and be defeated piecemeal. Either way, the outcome was the same: destruction. By early 1945, Germany's situation was hopeless. Ammunition supplies collapsed under relentless Allied bombing. The once proud artillery regiments of the Wehrmacht had become ghosts, operating 2 or 3 guns where they had once fielded 6. Their horses starved, their crews were dead or captured. Their shells nearly gone. In contrast, American production was at its peak. The factories back home were producing more guns in 1944 than in any previous year, and ammunition flowed so freely that frontline units could fire at will. In the final months of the war, American artillery reached its ultimate form. With advanced fire direction centers, reliable radios, and computers for calculations, the U.S. Army could coordinate thousands of guns across entire sectors. A single forward observer could summon destruction within minutes and know with absolute certainty that it would arrive on target. When the Ruhr pocket fell in April 1945, the surviving German mathematician, Hauptmann Werner Hoffmann, who had analyzed American firing tables, summarized the reality. The Americans have created a system that does not depend on individual genius. It delivers overwhelming firepower through method, not talent. That is the revolution we could not match. Even after surrender, the lessons were clear. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, later wrote, "American artillery achieved what we believed impossible. They transformed a supporting arm into the decisive weapon of modern war. No movement, no defense, no concentration could survive their fire." Historians would later agree, while tanks and aircraft captured the public's imagination, it was artillery that broke the Wehrmacht in the West. It was the guns that turned every German attack into a massacre and every American defense into an impenetrable wall. The proximity fuse alone, that invisible guardian in the sky, shattered morale as much as it shattered bodies. Its explosions came without warning, detonating just above the ground, shredding everything below. German survivors called it the silent death. For men like Zimmermann, who lived through it, the memory never faded. Years later, after immigrating to the United States, he was asked what weapon he feared most during the war. His answer was simple: not tanks, not planes, not even their infantry. The weapon I feared most, the one that still haunts me, was American artillery, because it killed without warning, without mercy, from miles away. That was true terror. In the end, this is not merely the story of guns and shells. It's the story of how the industrial age reshaped war itself. Individual bravery, tactical brilliance, all became secondary to organization, logistics, and production. America had turned the battlefield into an equation, and they had all the numbers. The Germans, for all their skill, were fighting a machine that never tired, never ran out, never missed. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, its armies had learned the final lesson: that courage cannot compensate for a lack of capacity, that a nation's factories can be as decisive as its soldiers, and that the real king of battle was not a general, but a system. A system that fired with precision, speed, and power so great that those who survived would never forget it. Because on the fields of Europe, beneath the thunder of 1,000 guns, the truth of modern war was written, not in words, but in fire. As the echoes of those guns fade into history, one truth remains: wars are not only won on the battlefield, but in the foundries, in the factories, and in the minds of those who dared to think differently. The men who stood beneath the storm of shells would never forget that sound, the thunder of American artillery, the heartbeat of an industrial giant that reshaped the world. But this was only one front of the war. Beyond the smoke and steel, another storm was already rising in the skies over Japan, in the depths of the Pacific, and in the secret laboratories where the next weapon of unimaginable power was being prepared. Because World War II did not end with artillery fire, it ended with something far greater, a flash that split the sky and changed humanity forever.
So if you've journeyed with us through this chapter of history, don't stop here. Subscribe now and join us for the next story, where the final battles of the war reveal not only how the conflict ended, but how the modern world began.
And as the screen fades to black,
Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep watching for more untold stories of courage, chaos, and the moments that defined an era. This is history, as it was lived, as it was fought, and as it was won. Watch the next documentary and discover what happened when the guns fell silent, but the world's deadliest secret came to life.